What's up guys, Joe Youngblood here. I'm a whitetail habitat designer with Whitetail Habitat Solutions, and Jeff Sturgis, Dylan, and Kevin. I hope everyone's doing well. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Actually, as of right now, I have 499 subscribers, so you could be the 500th. I'm all cold brewed up and ready to go. I wanted to do some different videos. I wanted to start kind of picking simple ideas or terms and kind of just doing a little bit more deep dive on them, explaining them a little so that as we continually refer to them, you guys know what we're talking about, or as you're studying maybe your own parcels, you can kind of look at these ideas and make sure that you're implementing them in the best way possible. So today, I thought we would do travel corridors. So starting off, what is a travel corridor? Are we going to consider any deer movement a travel corridor? Well, for our purposes, we are going to refer to travel corridors mainly as what we want to see deer doing from food to food, food to bedding, bedding to food, so on and so forth, as they make their foundation of movement that we're trying to create, right? As they do that and they move between those major sources and what we're trying to define for them and how we hunt it, those are the corridors that we are going to focus on. All right, so that's what we're referring to. When it comes to access for these corridors, of course, most of you probably know we're not going to be just walking down the same corridors we expect the deer to walk on. I've actually been seeing some other videos on YouTube where they might be making some access and dozing out trails and things like that, but they talk about walking right up it, you know, having a nice easy walk to the stand, but then turning around and expecting the deer to just come the exact same way that they just spent, you know, a quarter mile, half mile walking on. And that's going to be a pretty big detriment. So make sure that not only are you not using the corridors for your own access, I'd highly recommend making sure that you're not even crossing any travel corridor as you access your stands. So for a quick example, let's say this is a simple corridor and we have a bedding area along with maybe just a basic simple food plot. Let's say we have a nice terrain feature, a hill, and you want to, for whatever reason, hunt this side of the travel corridor, and you end up following this hill across and setting up a tree stand on this side, maybe because, again, you can keep your body around, behind a hill and the deer aren't going to see you. However, you've walked right over that travel corridor. Now, being that that's probably either an in-between or more of a morning stand, the deer are coming back from the plots, yes, you might get a shot off before those deer get to you, but I highly recommend you avoiding that. On top of it all, if we look at our general principles that we follow, and you are walking across in towards the middle of your property, depending on each setup, you're generally taking away or busting out your sanctuary, right, that we were trying to create, where the deer are not going to be able to see, smell, or hear you, and you are kind of intruding on that. If you bust things out, you're just doing more harm than good. So try and avoid any access over the corridors or on the corridors. Add-ons. Of course, when we look at these paths and they're coming from all the other stuff that we're implementing it, you know, there's a couple other things we're going to get down here, like natural movement, but how else do we want to keep deer continually utilizing this natural movement, or the movement maybe we're trying to ease them into? That could be water holes, it could be mock scrapes, bedding areas, it could be other, you know, chestnut tree, something like that. Things that we are already putting in between food and bedding. All right, that's a perfect place for a mock scrape, as long as we are going to have a tree stand in that spot. Again, I know Jeff always mentions we're not going to want to have really overdo it with all these mock scrapes. They should be with a purpose, and they should be near a stand at all times. But if we are going to be hunting a pinch point or something, a corridor that the deer are traveling between food and bedding, that's kind of a perfect opportunity for both a mock scrape and potentially a water hole. Water hole for numerous reasons. One, obviously they're on their way potentially to a food plot, and it's a good little pit stop. Maybe during the rut, the bucks are chasing does, they're moving through, they're going to be more thirsty at that point, and hit the water hole. But either way, it's good to keep the repetition and keep those deer hitting those markers and keeping that same line of movement, giving you a potential shot on that spot. To coincide with that natural movement and terrain, kind of what I was referring to. Obviously the terrain would be a little bit different of an example, but if you guys remember maybe one of my hinge cut videos on my farm that I've been going over with you, again, if you're new to the channel, implementing a lot of Jeff's, you know, not only his plan, but all of his concepts on my property and going over that with you guys. Really a farm that was hunted, but you know, was not hunted very well. I'm sad to say. The family, super nice people, but we pretty much implemented almost the opposite of what they were doing to such an extent. But I did have an area and a video I'll link up here below, above that you know, had some hinge cuts, which we'll talk about last on the farm. And the hinge cuts were there for a couple reasons. One, it was already a main line of movement, natural movement. The deer were already coming from some bedding areas which do need to be enhanced, and I will bring that to you. Running this ridge top and then making their way to what used to be an ag field and now will be, or is, the start of a linear food plot that kind of acts as a hunting plot and goes to a holding plot on our property. But if that was not the case and I was literally trying to drop hinges and funnel the deer in one channel they weren't already using, that's just a 6 foot wide path, I would say that you have a very minimal chance of getting the deer to do exactly what you want in an area they weren't really using all that much before, and now you have restricted a ton of their movement. Hinge cuts will be a separate video that, you know, something we always come back to and many habitat managers do. But in that instance, you know, if there wasn't already somewhat of a natural movement, it would not be a good idea. You'd pretty much be wasting those trees. And a lot of what you'll see if you do go back and watch the video is there's probably a need to drop some more of the trees to add sunlight if I want to keep those deer, or excuse me, those hinge cuts living. But again, it's just something that we need time for and to keep improving so that it can be as best as possible. So we've done a lot of chainsaw work and we'll definitely be doing quite a bit more. Terrain, using the hills, things like that to hide your movement away from the deer, especially more when you're accessing the stand. A long time ago, Jeff gave me a great analogy, and it was essentially, you know, whether it's a food plot, the corridor, or what have you, if you're screening things as good as you possibly can, it should almost feel like you're getting to your stand behind something, whether it's brush, terrain feature, what have you, getting up into the stand and then looking down on, you know, the prey or what you're trying to, you know, shoot. In this case, of course, deer. But looking down on that food plot or travel corridor. And for a lot of the setups, and those of you using switchgrass or other shrubs and trees to hide in those rednecks, you know, that's another perfect example. You know, going up that ladder behind the blind, completely hidden, using terrain features and access to your advantage, and then kind of popping up, and it's like a new world. You're seeing, you know, perfect shot angles for when those deer come through. Morning or evening. So this is kind of interesting because this specific topic is travel corridors. You do have the potential to, you know, find one of those stands that could be one of those all-day sits of both morning and evening opportunity when you're in something that's, you know, maybe between food and bedding, with enough time to get in there with proper access when the deer are coming back from the food, enough time are far enough away from bedding to where you can access and not spook any deer and set up for them coming the evening way. But somewhere in between two things like that would be pretty beneficial. Hinge cuts, we pretty much covered, guys. The only other thing I would say is that when it comes to your area, you really need to look at whether, you know, the deer are used to something like that. If you're in, you know, Michigan, whatever, Northern Ohio, any big ag areas, not Northern Michigan, of course, the deer might be used to these little tiny hidey holes, little blocks of woods, islands of woods, I sometimes call it, where they're hiding from hunters, and they're used to that really thick stuff. That's what they need, and there's just not as much around. Well, you're going to be able to get away with more cuts and more you know, intrusion into the land to where they can use that for side cover. There might be not as much room to roam. versus a big woods area, or maybe, you know, something like that that's a little more south. The deer aren't quite as pressured. You go in and make a super thick area, mow all the trees down, and just make hinge cuts everywhere. They're most likely not going to like that at all. They're going to stay out of that area, and you're going to kind of ruin your hunt. So be very careful with the hinge cuts. Think about your area, think about sunlight, think about if those are needed. Again, it's definitely not recommended on every property. And then even when it is a property, it's usually a very specific area for one reason or another that we've talked about. But all in all, hinge cuts in this case should just be used possibly to block one movement or another to keep deer on the trail that you are hunting. I think that about wraps this up, guys. If you get questions, let me know. I hope it gives you a little bit better idea of what a travel corridor is, what we're referring to when we speak about travel corridors, and some things to pay attention to when you're looking over your land, and just making sure that you're not breaking any of these rules, not spooking deer, and giving yourself the best opportunity. So I hope it helps, and next video will actually be out on the farm where our trees are coming in this week. I much prefer typical videos out on the farm. It's a lot more fun for me, and maybe for you guys as well. But we'll be planting those a little bit similar to our previous last year's planting video, with a couple of other added bonuses in the switchgrass and things like that I want to go over with you guys. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see you guys next time.